Let me start with a story that happened when I was still in high school. Because this was one of the first things in my life that made me feel very clearly that maybe the world of dreams is not as simple as people think. Back then, my younger uncle died in a car accident. He died on the spot. It happened suddenly and violently, but my mother did not tell me right away. I was still in school, and in the eyes of the family, I was still just a kid. They were also afraid that the shock would affect my studies, especially because I was in an important stage of high school. A few days later, I was about to go home on break, and on the night before I went home, while I was still at school, I had a dream that I can still remember vividly. In the dream, there was a field, a wide open patch of farmland. In the middle of that field stood a very strange little structure made out of cornstalks, almost like a rough triangular hut or a makeshift tent. It was low and narrow, the sort of thing nobody would actually live in, but in the dream it felt deeply meaningful. At the entrance sat my aunt, my late uncle's wife. I looked at her and felt confused. Why was she sitting there? Why in a field? Why inside that strange cornstalk hut? In the dream, I asked her, Auntie, why are you here? What are you doing here? She answered me very simply. She said, Hurry and take a look at your uncle. He's back. So I leaned forward and looked inside that cornstalk shelter, and there he was. My uncle was sitting inside, my aunt was at the entrance, and he was seated farther in. I only looked at him for a brief moment, but the instant I saw him, I woke up. It was one of those dreams where you wake up suddenly and the whole scene is still stuck in your mind, as if someone had pressed it into your memory. I especially remembered the cornstalk shelter. It was so peculiar that it kept bothering me. Then I went home. The moment I saw my mother, I started telling her about that dream. I said, Mom, I had such a strange dream before coming back. I dreamed there was this triangular shelter made of corn stalks. My aunt was sitting at the entrance, and my uncle was sitting inside. Before I even finished the story, my mother burst into tears. That was when she told me the truth. My uncle had already died. The family had kept it from me because I was in school, and they did not want me to be distracted or emotionally devastated. But now that I had come home, she said maybe my uncle had appeared in my dream on purpose. Maybe he had come to tell me himself. Maybe he had given me a dream message because the family had not told me. So my mother quickly wiped away her tears and took me to his newly made grave to burn paper offerings and kowtow. When we got there, I saw something that made the dream click into place instantly. On top of a fresh grave mound, they had stuck a whole lot of broken corn stalks. They were arranged over the mound in a way that looked uncannily similar to the strange cornstalk structure I had seen in my dream. At that moment, I understood. The little hut in the dream was not a hut at all. It was the grave. My aunt, sitting at the front, and my uncle sitting inside, had been showing me exactly where he was now. It was not symbolic in a vague way. It felt direct, almost literal. That was the first time in my life that I consciously felt maybe when a person dies, it does not all simply end. Maybe something does remain. Maybe the soul really does exist in some form. Even now, when I think back on that dream, it still feels too precise to dismiss lightly. After that first story, the episode moved on to another one, this time connected with spirit worship, household altars, and the kind of folk religion that still survives in many parts of China. The storyteller said that years after getting married, there was one time when his mother in law explained why she had never gone to Beijing to help raise the grandchildren. By then, she was already in her 70s. She was uneducated, could not read or write, and belonged entirely to an older rural world of belief and custom. She said that when the young couple had first gotten married, she had gone to a local spirit medium in the village and prayed for one thing above all else, that their first child would be a boy. Later, the couple really did have a son. So in her mind, the prayer had worked, and as a result, she went back to fulfill her vow to that spirit medium. From then on, every year, on important days and festivals, she would go with a group of older women from the village to burn incense and worship at another, even more powerful spirit, medium's place. In that local language, these people were not described in scholarly terms. They were just the people who carried spirits, the people who could be mounted by an entity, the people who could go into trance and speak for something beyond the ordinary. One day, during one of those visits, that spirit medium looked over the women present and said something significant. Among all of you, Zifang is the one with the best affinity. Hifang was the mother-in-law. In other words, the message was that the spirits had also set their sights on her. They wanted her too. They wanted her to serve, to carry them, to become one of these ritual vessels. At first, she refused. She did not say, I don't want this sea. Instead, she pushed the responsibility onto her husband. She said, My husband doesn't agree. According to the story, that was a dangerous thing to say in front of those entities and in front of that whole ritual system, because it was taken as direct rejection. After that, misfortunes started piling up around the family. First, the father-in-law injured his eye while working and went blind in one eye. Later, after rain and snow, he fell and broke his leg. Each time, the implication from the spirit medium was the same. If you keep refusing, more trouble will come. Eventually, things escalated to the point where the spirit medium demanded that the old man himself be brought there in person and asked face to face whether he agreed or not. The message was blunt, even threatening. If he still refused, there could be further calamities. In the end, he was frightened and gave in. From then on the 1st and 15th day of every lunar month, the old woman began performing spirit-related observances at home. She did not dare be careless. She said she would not help outsiders solve problems or diagnose spiritual trouble because she was too old and could not hear clearly, and she feared offending the beings if she mishandled anything. But she still kept up the offerings, incense, and ritual attendance. In their home, there was even a kind of hierarchy chart or ritual picture showing the different levels of the beings they worshipped. One of the major names involved was the great sage equal to heaven, the Monkey King. The storyteller's point was that in that world of belief, the spirit realm is arranged in ranks and levels just like officialdom or society. There are high beings, low beings, famous names, hidden names, and entire chains of command. Then Wang Dai took over with his own familiar style. Half folk preacher, half street philosopher. He said that many of these entities do not necessarily reveal themselves under their true form. Instead, they borrow the names of famous gods and legendary figures. They might claim to be the great sage equal to heaven, Erlang Shen, Nezha, the Dragon King, Mazu, or some other grand title. But behind those names, he argued, what is often really at work are the common animal spirits of northern Chinese folk belief. Fox spirits, weasel spirits, hedgehog spirits, snake spirits, and other similar beings. In his telling, these entities like prestige, they like to put on a high title. They like a grand banner. But that does not mean they are what they claim to be. From there, he launched into a long and chaotic discussion about offerings, sacred food, and what kinds of things attract spirits. He talked about incense and burnt paper money, of course, but he also became strangely fixated on fermented wheat foods, buns, steamed bread, leavened dough, and sacrificial offerings. He even dragged in biblical material in his own very loose way, saying that old religions everywhere have records of gods specifying what they want to be offered. In his argument, fragrant foods, ritual bread, incense, smoke, and offerings all create the kind of signal that unseen beings like, whether you think his theology makes sense or not. What mattered in the story was his warning. If you bring the wrong things into the wrong places, such as graveyards, abandoned land, or remote places heavy with yin energy, you may end up attracting exactly the kind of attention you do not want. He said that if someone burns spirit money recklessly in a desolate place, or starts eating the kinds of food traditionally connected with offerings near graves or wilderness shrines, it is like sending out an invitation. In his language, once the signal goes up, all kinds of things notice. Then the episode shifted again, this time into another dream story, one that was much darker. A woman wrote in saying that about 2 years earlier, she had been utterly exhausted from work. She had been traveling constantly for business, coming home drained and physically depleted. On top of that, she happened to be on her period, in the middle of the 7th lunar month, a time many people culturally associate with heavy yin energy and ghostly activity. For 3 nights in a row, she had exactly the same dream. In that dream, she was sitting in front of a very low structure, some kind of crude shed or work area, so low that it was only about a person's height. Her job in the dream was horrific. Bodies kept being thrown toward her. Some were missing arms, some were missing legs, some were bloodied, some had no clothes. Each time a body was tossed over, she had to clean it, arrange it, put it in order, and lay it aside behind her before the next one came. The truly disturbing detail was that, inside the dream, she did not actually feel fear. It did not feel like a horror movie while she was in it. It felt like labor, repetitive, exhausting labor, like she had been assigned a job and simply had to keep doing it. But after waking up, the terror hit her in full. The first night she thought it was just a nightmare. The second night made her uneasy. By the third night, after dreaming the exact same thing, again she was deeply frightened. She said that even while writing the letter, her hands were shaking. So after waking up, she gathered her courage, looked into the empty room, and shouted out loud, "My home is protected by the great sage equal to heaven. If you dare come again, I will have him destroy every single one of you." And after that, even though the ghost festival period was approaching, the dream never returned. Wang Dai's interpretation was straightforward in his own worldview. He said she had probably been dragged into the underworld to do labor as if she had been temporarily recruited to work among the dead. Then he shifted into one of his practical remedy monologues. According to him, women who are physically overworked, emotionally stressed, or on their period can become temporarily low in yang energy and therefore easier to affect. His proposed solution sounded absurd and traditional at the same time. Drink soup made from a young free-range rooster, not just any chicken, but a young rooster. In his view, that kind of soup is especially good at restoring vitality and rebuilding yang energy. He claimed that if you are in that sort of weakened state, drinking that soup for a night or two can help stop exactly this kind of dream disturbance. Then, as if all that were not enough, the episode swerved into another letter, one much more grounded in modern life, and yet told in a way that still tied it back to ideas of obsession, possession, and being controlled by forces beyond your reason. This final story came from a woman who described herself as traditional and conservative. She said her husband had been her first real love. They met in college, stayed together, graduated, and got married. She had always seen herself as the kind of person who was stable and loyal. But in 2022, her work life became very difficult. She had to travel frequently for projects, sometimes staying away for nearly a month at a time. Her career was under pressure. She was tired, emotionally strained, and living in that unstable rhythm people often fall into when they are constantly in transit. During that time, by chance, she reconnected with a man who had liked her before college. Both of them already had families. At first, they simply chatted, but the more they talked, the more the emotional atmosphere changed. Eventually, the relationship crossed the line and became physical. She admitted frankly that whenever she was with him, she constantly wanted to kiss him. She did not get tired of kissing him. Sex with him was not remarkable in the conventional way. In fact, she said he lasted only a short time each round. But after finishing, they would kiss again, recover, and start again. Over one night, they could repeat this 4 or 5 times. What fascinated her most was that her attachment to him did not seem to follow the normal logic people use when they discuss sex. She openly said that her husband was physically bigger and could last much longer. By ordinary standards, her husband should have been more satisfying. But for some reason, with this other man, she felt a strong, almost uncontrollable craving. It was not just lust in the moment. After each time they were together, she would spend nearly a full week unable to focus properly, mentally trapped in the memory, unable to pull herself back into ordinary life. Eventually, she broke it off, not because the pull disappeared, but because she could not bear the guilt. She felt she had put a green hat on her husband, betrayed her marriage, and damaged her own sense of who she was. After that, she and her husband even tried applying the host's so-called climbing slope theory to improve their own sex life, but it did not really solve the problem. They were too familiar with each other. The sense of novelty, discovery, and urgency was gone. Wang Dai's commentary on this part was crude, practical, and completely in character. He said that when this kind of situation appears, it often reflects disharmony in the couple's sexual life. He discouraged wasting money on fortune telling over ordinary life troubles, and instead returned once again to his folk remedy worldview: nourish the body, rebuild energy, especially with strengthening foods like rooster soup, and work on restoring balance. Taken as a whole, this episode traveled through several layers of Chinese folk, metaphysics, and everyday emotional experience. First, there was the dream message from a dead relative, so vivid and symbolically exact that it felt like contact from the other side. Then came the world of spirit mediums, family altars, ritual obligations, and the idea that refusal can bring misfortune. Then there was the horrifying dream of processing corpses, interpreted as temporary labor in the underworld. And finally, there was a very human story of desire, guilt, fixation, and sexual obsession that was not supernatural on the surface, but was described in language close to haunting, compulsion, and possession. That is what makes these stories compelling. Even if a listener does not literally believe in ghosts, spirit mediums, or underworld jobs, the emotional reality inside the stories is strong. Dreams can feel like messages. Guilt can feel like punishment. Desire can feel like possession. Exhaustion can make the boundary between body, mind, and fear much thinner than we usually admit. And that, in the end, is why this kind of material sits so naturally inside the world of Chinese metaphysics. Because it is never only about ghosts. It is also about grief, family, exhaustion, sex, shame, longing, memory, and the strange ways people try to explain what happens when ordinary language no longer feels sufficient.